There's a question that keeps coming up whenever people talk about Jungkook. Is he actually that good at everything, or is it just the hype? Here's what's interesting. The answer isn't as simple as yes or no, because what makes Jungkook stand out isn't just raw talent. It's the combination of who he is when the cameras are rolling and who he is when they're not. The youngest member of the best-selling boy group in history, a solo artist with a debut album that broke records on the Billboard charts, and somehow still the guy his own members can't stop teasing like a little brother. But talent and fame are things we already know about. What's worth paying attention to are the details underneath, the habits, the quirks, the moments that reveal what kind of person actually exists behind the stage presence. Some of these facts you might have heard in passing, others probably not, and at least one of them might completely change how you see him. Here are 7 unique facts about Jungkook that make ARMY admire him even more. Number 7. Jungkook has the nickname Golden Maknae. In Korean, maknae simply means the youngest person in a group. It's a common word, used in families, friend circles, workplaces. But when BTS members started calling Jungkook the Golden Maknae, they weren't just being affectionate. They were making a very specific observation about something they watched develop right in front of them. Jungkook joined Big Hit Entertainment at 15 years old after being scouted at a local audition in Busan in 2011. He was the last member to be added to what would become BTS. By the time the group debuted in June 2013, he was still only 15, the youngest in the room in almost every room he walked into during those early years. And yet, from almost the beginning, the members noticed something that couldn't quite be explained by training hours alone. RM, BTS's leader and one of the most articulate members when it comes to describing his teammates, has said on multiple occasions that Jungkook has a natural ability to absorb skills faster than almost anyone he's encountered. The word that kept coming up from multiple members independently was golden, not because he was perfect, but because whatever he touched seemed to develop quickly and develop well. Let's be specific about what that actually looks like in practice, because this nickname only makes sense when you look at the actual range of what he does. As the group's main vocalist, Jungkook carries some of the heaviest vocal responsibilities in BTS's discography. Tracks like Euphoria, My Time, and Still With You, a self-produced song he released as a gift to fans in 2020, all require a level of technical control and emotional range that trained vocalists spend years working toward. He was doing this as a teenager. By the time he was in his early 20s, South Korean vocal coaches and music critics were regularly citing him as one of the strongest idol vocalists of his generation. But the singing is just one layer. Jungkook is also one of BTS's main dancers. In a group where every single member is expected to perform complex choreography in sync at a high level consistently, that's already a serious bar. But Jungkook has repeatedly been pointed to by choreographers and fellow performers as someone with an exceptional ability to pick up and internalize movement. During survival shows and behind-the-scenes footage from trainee days, you can actually watch him learn routines that take others significantly longer to absorb. Then there's the visual side. His photography has been shared directly through BTS's official channels, and the quality is consistently well above what you'd expect from someone doing it as a casual hobby. His drawings, which he's shared selectively over the years, show a technical understanding of proportion and shading that takes most people dedicated practice to reach. He learned to play guitar. He's shown competency in video editing. He has, at various points, expressed serious interest in directing, in music production, and in learning languages beyond Korean and basic English phrases. Now, it's important to be honest here. Jungkook is not a professional graphic designer, a master chef, or a concert-level classical guitarist. The Golden Maknae nickname doesn't mean he's literally world-class at everything. What it means, what the members were actually observing, is that his learning curve is unusually steep in an unusually wide range of areas. He gets good quickly at things that most people find difficult. That distinction matters because it shifts the conversation from hype to something more grounded and, frankly, more interesting. In the world of Korean pop, idol training is grueling and highly specialized. Trainees typically spend years honing 2 or 3 core skills, usually singing, dancing, and stage presence, because the system demands depth in those specific areas. Breadth is often sacrificed. The fact that Jungkook managed to develop genuine competency across a much wider spectrum without sacrificing the core skills that his role demanded is what made even the industry insiders take notice. There's also a timing factor that often gets overlooked. Jungkook spent his formative teenage years, the years when most people are in school figuring out who they are, inside a highly structured entertainment training system. He didn't grow up pursuing hobbies freely. His time was scheduled, his development was monitored, and the expectations on him were significant. The fact that curiosity and skill acquisition flourished under those conditions rather than being suppressed by them says something real about how he's wired. BTS members have talked openly about how Jungkook sometimes makes them feel, not in a resentful way, but in the way that anyone feels when they watch someone near them do effortlessly what they themselves have to work hard for. Jimin once described the experience of watching Jungkook pick up dance routines during their early training days as something between admiration and mild disbelief. J-Hope, who is himself one of the group's strongest dancers and had a background in dance before joining Dig Hit, acknowledged Jungkook's natural physical ability in several interviews. What's notable is that these aren't promotional statements made for cameras. They show up in candid moments, in old vlogs, in unscripted conversations, which makes them a different kind of evidence than a prepared press quote. His 2023 solo album, Golden, was literally named after this nickname. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, making him the first Korean solo artist to achieve that position. The title wasn't chosen randomly. It was both a personal statement and a nod to the identity that has followed him before he was famous enough for anyone outside Korea to know his name. The Golden Maknae label started as an inside observation among 7 people in a small practice room. It ended up becoming one of the most recognized nicknames in global pop culture. That alone tells you something about how accurately it captured what was actually there. And speaking of things that capture who Jungkook actually is, the next fact reveals a side of him that exists almost entirely off the stage and that very few people saw coming.
Number 6. Jungkook loves drawing. Most people, when they think about what Jungkook does in his free time, jump straight to music or exercise. Those are the obvious answers, the ones that get the most coverage, the ones that fit neatly into the image of a high-performing idol. But there's a quieter side to how he spends his time, one that he's revealed slowly and selectively over the years, and it has nothing to do with a stage or a microphone. Jungkook draws, and he takes it seriously. This isn't a casual mention buried in a single interview. It's a thread that runs consistently through years of content, fan meetings, behind-the-scenes footage, personal live streams, and the rare occasions where he's chosen to share his work directly with ARMY. Across all of it, drawing comes up again and again as something he genuinely returns to, not something he does for appearances or to seem more relatable. The first time many fans got a clear look at his artistic ability was through the BTS content platform Weverse and various social media posts where Jungkook shared sketches he had done himself. What struck people wasn't that an idol had drawn something, it was the level of technical competency on display. The proportions were controlled, the shading showed an understanding of light and form. These weren't rough doodles, they were the kind of work that reflects real time invested in learning how to see and translate what you see onto paper. He has shared portraits, including one of fellow BTS member V, which circulated widely among fans and drew attention for its accuracy and detail. He's also drawn figures and characters, experimenting with different styles rather than staying locked into one approach. That willingness to explore different visual languages is consistent with how he approaches other skills, with genuine curiosity rather than a desire to simply check a box. It's worth understanding where this sits in the broader context of his creative life, because it's not isolated from everything else he does. Jungkook has also shown serious interest in photography. He has contributed photos to BTS's official content, and the images he takes reflect a considered eye for composition and light. His interest in filmmaking and video production has also surfaced in interviews and personal projects. Drawing, photography, and visual storytelling form a coherent pattern. He is someone who thinks visually and who invests real energy into developing that part of himself. In a 2021 Mott's On concert behind-the-scenes segment, Jungkook was seen sketching during downtime, not because anyone asked him to, not because a camera was set up specifically to catch it, but because that's what he does when he has a moment to himself. That kind of detail matters. It's the difference between someone who drew once for a fan event and someone for whom drawing is actually part of how they process and spend their time. During various Bangtan Bomb and vlog-style content released through Big Hit and Hybe, Jungkook's workspace and personal belongings have occasionally appeared in frame, and art supplies are a recurring presence. Sketchbooks, pencils, these aren't props placed for aesthetic effect. They're consistent background details that show up across different settings and time periods. There's also a connection between his visual interests and his music video involvement. Jungkook has been vocal about wanting greater creative input in the visual aspects of BTS's work, not just performing in front of the camera, but understanding and eventually influencing what happens behind it. His solo content, including the self-directed elements of some of his personal video projects, reflects an artist who is thinking about framing, atmosphere, and visual storytelling in a way that goes beyond what most performers engage with. This matters because it reframes the golden maknae identity in an important way. The nickname, as discussed, points to his versatility, but versatility without depth can feel shallow, a party trick more than a genuine quality. What the drawing interest reveals is that at least some of his pursuits involve sustained, private investment. Drawing is not a skill you develop through charm or natural charisma. It requires sitting alone with something difficult, failing repeatedly, and continuing anyway. The fact that he's developed real competency in it suggests that his approach to learning is not just fast, it's also patient when the situation requires patience. His artistic sensibility has also influenced how fans and critics interpret his stage presence. There's a reason choreographers and directors who've worked with BTS have described Jungkook as someone who doesn't just execute movement, but seems to understand the visual impact of it. That spatial awareness, that sense of how a body looks within a frame, it's not entirely separate from the hours he spent thinking about line, proportion, and form in a sketchbook. Among ARMI, his drawings have become collector's items in their own right. When he shares artwork, which he does sparingly and on his own terms, the response is immediate and significant, not because fans celebrate everything he does uncritically, but because the work itself holds up to inspection. People who have no connection to BTS have come across his shared sketches and commented on the technical quality without knowing who made them. That kind of independent validation is a different category of recognition than fan enthusiasm. What's perhaps most telling is what drawing represents in the context of his life. Jungkook entered the entertainment industry at 15. His schedule from that point forward was largely not his own. Practice rooms, recording studios, stages, press obligations. Art, particularly the kind you do privately with a pencil and paper, is one of the few things in that kind of life that belongs entirely to you. It requires no collaboration, no approval, no performance. It's just you and the work. The fact that he chose that as something to invest in quietly, over years, says something real about who he is when the professional demands step back. Which brings us to the next fact, because while drawing is something he does in private, the next thing on this list is something that is very, very public, and yet still reveals a depth of character that goes well beyond what most people initially see.
Number 5. Jungkook is known for loving exercise. There's a version of this fact that gets reduced to fan content, shirtless concert moments, gym selfies, the kind of surface-level coverage that generates clicks but doesn't actually tell you anything useful. That version is worth setting aside entirely, because when you look at what Jungkook's relationship with physical training actually involves, the history, the consistency, the specific choices he's made, it becomes something genuinely worth paying attention to. Jungkook's interest in physical fitness isn't a recent development shaped by image management. It traces back to his early trainee years when he was still a teenager navigating one of the most physically demanding entertainment systems in the world. Korean idol training involves long daily hours of dance practice, vocal sessions, and performance rehearsal, a schedule that places enormous strain on the body. Most trainees survive it by managing their energy carefully. Jungkook responded to it differently. He started actively building capacity, not just maintaining it. By the time BTS began releasing content that gave fans a closer look at the members' personal lives, the Bangtan Bomb series, vlog content, and the various behind-the-scenes formats that Hybe has produced over the years, it became clear that exercise was something Jungkook pursued independently, outside of what his professional schedule required. He wasn't working out because someone told him to. He was working out because he wanted to. The specific disciplines he's engaged with over the years are worth noting because they reveal something about how he thinks about physical development. He has spoken about and demonstrated interest in weight training, which requires consistency and technical precision to do effectively and safely. He has engaged seriously with boxing, not casually, but with enough dedication that the training has visibly influenced his physical conditioning and the way he carries himself in performance contexts. He has shown genuine interest in running, in swimming, and in overall athletic conditioning that goes well beyond what stage performance alone demands. During BTS's 2019 stadium tour, one of the most physically grueling undertakings any artist can attempt, Jungkook's stamina consistently drew comment from both fans and industry observers. Stadium performances require sustained high-energy output across sets that can run well over an hour, often in challenging environmental conditions. The physical preparation behind that level of performance is significant, and Jungkook's approach to it has been consistently disciplined. There's a specific moment from BTS's reality content that illustrates the point clearly. During a break period, when members were given relatively unstructured time, Jungkook chose to spend a portion of it maintaining his training routine rather than fully resting. When asked about it, his explanation was straightforward. He didn't feel right not moving. That's not a promotional answer. It's a description of someone whose relationship with physical activity has moved from discipline into something closer to need. The way serious athletes talk about training not as something they have to do, but as something that regulates how they feel. His interest in sports extends beyond solo training. Jungkook has participated enthusiastically in the physical activity segments of BTS's variety content, games, sports competitions, athletic challenges, and the pattern across years of footage is consistent. He competes seriously, he's physically capable across a wide range of activities, and he genuinely enjoys the process rather than treating it as content to perform. He has also been open about the relationship between physical training and his mental state. In interviews and personal content, he's described exercise as something that helps him manage the psychological weight of the industry, the pressure of performance, the demands of public life, the difficulty of maintaining a sense of self under circumstances that most people never encounter. That honesty is more valuable than any performance metric because it contextualizes the behavior. This isn't vanity, it's coping, and it's self-regulation, and it happens to produce visible physical results. It's also worth placing this in the context of what Korean idol culture typically looks like around physical appearance. The industry has a well-documented and often criticized relationship with body standards. Trainees are regularly monitored for weight, dietary restrictions are common, and the pressure around physical appearance is intense and frequently harmful.
Jungkook's approach stands in a somewhat different place. While he operates within that system and is not immune to its pressures, what comes through consistently in his own descriptions of why he trains is capability and feeling, not the pursuit of a specific look. That distinction, however subtle, matters. His boxing training particularly became a visible thread in his solo-era content. The discipline required for boxing, the combination of cardiovascular endurance, coordination, hand speed, and mental focus, aligns with how he seems to approach physical challenges generally, not looking for the easiest path to a result, but interested in the full complexity of what a skill demands. When his solo debut album Golden was released in November 2023 and he embarked on related promotional activities, the physical stamina required for that period, performances, media appearances, interviews across time zones, was substantial. The conditioning he'd maintained through years of consistent training was directly relevant to his ability to perform at that level without visible deterioration in quality. What's ultimately interesting about Jungkook's relationship with fitness isn't the outcome, it's the motivation. He's talked about wanting to be strong, not in an abstract, aspirational way, but in the practical sense of wanting his body to be capable of what he asks it to do. For someone whose entire career is built on physical performance, singing live while executing complex choreography, night after night, in venues that hold tens of thousands of people, that's a reasonable and serious commitment. It also creates a feedback loop that's visible in his work. The physical confidence that comes from genuine conditioning affects how someone occupies space on a stage. It affects breathing, and breathing affects singing. It affects the quality of movement in dance. These things are connected in ways that aren't always obvious from the outside, but are immediately apparent to anyone who knows what to look for. And if his approach to physical discipline reveals something about his character, the consistency, the self-motivation, the depth of commitment, then the next fact takes that same character and shows it in a context that is far more unpredictable and far more entertaining to watch.
Number 4. Jungkook has a competitive streak. Watch enough BTS content, and there is a significant amount of it spanning over a decade, and a pattern emerges around Jungkook that is hard to miss once you see it. The moment something becomes a competition, something shifts in him. His focus sharpens, his body language changes. He stops being the relaxed, playful youngest member and becomes someone who is quietly, completely invested in winning. This isn't a character trait that gets managed or softened for content. It shows up raw and unfiltered in some of the most casual settings imaginable: variety game segments, backstage challenges, informal bets between members during downtime, and it's been consistent enough across years of footage that the members themselves have named it and frequently use it as a running thread in group content. The clearest window into this side of Jungkook is the long-running series of BTS variety content, including Run BTS, the group's own entertainment show that ran across multiple seasons and involved the members competing in games, physical challenges, and skill-based activities. Over the course of that show, Jungkook's competitive behavior became one of its most reliable and genuinely entertaining elements. He played to win, not aggressively, not at the expense of the atmosphere, but with a kind of focused intent that made it obvious he was not approaching any challenge casually. What makes this worth examining seriously, rather than dismissing as a personality quirk, is what it reveals about his relationship with performance under pressure. Competitiveness, at its functional best, is a form of self-testing. It's the willingness to put your current level of ability up against someone else's and accept the result honestly. People who are genuinely competitive in this way tend to respond to losing differently than people who are competitive only when they're winning. They recalibrate, they want to understand what went wrong, and they come back sharper. Jungkook has demonstrated this pattern consistently. In Run BTS episodes involving physical challenges, relay races, precision games, reaction-based activities, his intensity is visible and consistent. When he wins, the reaction is real satisfaction, not performed celebration. When he loses, the reaction is equally real, a moment of genuine frustration, quickly followed by refocusing. The other members have, on multiple occasions, pointed out that Jungkook doesn't lose gracefully in the immediate moment, but that he recovers quickly and without lingering resentment, which is actually the healthier of the two parts of that equation. Jin, who has appeared alongside Jungkook in more competitive game segments than most, has described playing against him as requiring actual effort, a comment that lands differently when you consider that Jin himself is not a passive competitor. V has mentioned that Jungkook's competitive nature can sometimes transform what was intended as a casual activity into something considerably more intense simply by his presence and the energy he brings to it. This characteristic has also surfaced in professional contexts, in ways that matter more than game show footage. BTS as a group has talked openly about the internal pressure they've placed on themselves to improve, not relative to other artists, but relative to their own previous output. Within that framework, Jungkook's competitive streak operates not just outwardly against opponents, but inwardly against his own past performances. He has described in several interviews feeling unsatisfied with his own work even when external reception is positive. That's a specific kind of competitive orientation, one that sets the standard against yourself rather than against the field, and it's one of the hardest to sustain without tipping into unhealthy territory. The distinction he manages, and manages relatively well based on what's observable, is between competition as motivation and competition as anxiety. The former drives improvement, the latter drives burnout. What's visible in his content across the years is someone who channels the drive to win into preparation and effort, rather than into fear of losing. That's not a guaranteed outcome of having a competitive personality. It's a choice, reinforced repeatedly. There's also something worth noting about how his competitiveness coexists with his group dynamic. BTS is a 7-member group that has functioned cohesively for over a decade, a genuinely difficult thing to sustain in an industry with a high rate of internal conflict and disbandment. Jungkook's competitive nature, which theoretically could create friction within a team structure, has instead become a source of entertainment and even affection among the members. They know how to activate it deliberately when they want the content to have more energy. They also know how to diffuse it when they need the atmosphere to stay light. That balance, being genuinely competitive without letting it damage relationships, is a social skill that doesn't get discussed enough. It requires self-awareness, enough to recognize when your drive to win is appropriate to the stakes and when it isn't. In the low-stakes environment of a variety game show, Jungkook's intensity is disproportionate to what's actually on the line, and the members play that contrast for humor. But in a high-stakes performance context, that same intensity is exactly what the situation requires. He seems to understand, at least most of the time, which setting he's in. His solo work has also reflected this quality. The preparation he put into his 2023 debut, including the physical conditioning, the vocal training, the involvement in the creative direction of the project, had the hallmarks of someone who sets a high personal bar and is uncomfortable falling short of it. The album's commercial performance, while strong by any standard, was still analyzed by Jungkook himself in terms of what he would want to do differently or better next time. That's the competitive mind operating on its own work. It's a quality that the people closest to him find both admirable and occasionally exhausting, which is probably the most honest summary of what genuine competitiveness looks like in a real person rather than a curated narrative.
And if his competitive streak is about pushing himself against external challenges and internal standards, the next fact reveals the specific engine that powers all of it, an appetite for learning that has never stopped running since the day he walked into his first big hit practice room.
Number 3. Jungkook loves learning new things. There's a version of curiosity that is essentially performative, the kind that shows up in interviews as a charming personality trait, gets mentioned in a few magazine profiles, and then disappears entirely when the cameras stop rolling. And then there's the kind that actually shapes how someone spends their time, what they choose to invest in, and who they become over a period of years. For Jungkook, the evidence consistently points to the second category. The range of things he has genuinely pursued, not mentioned once and abandoned, but returned to repeatedly with documented results, is specific enough to build a real picture. Cooking is one of the clearest examples. Jungkook has talked about wanting to cook well across multiple years of content, and his engagement with it goes beyond the casual interest most people describe when they say they like cooking. He has discussed specific techniques, shown interest in understanding why certain methods work rather than just following recipes, and demonstrated in live cooking content that his skill level has actually developed over time. That last part, the demonstrable improvement, is what separates genuine learning from stated intention. He picked up photography with the same pattern. Not as a one-off hobby, but as something he invested real time in understanding. The technical components of photography, exposure, framing, the relationship between light and shadow, the decision-making behind composition, are things that take sustained engagement to develop. His contributions to BTS's official photography content and the images he has shared personally reflect someone who moved past the beginner stage through deliberate practice. The interest in filmmaking and video production sits alongside it as part of a broader engagement with the visual medium that has continued to deepen over the years. What's particularly worth examining is when this curiosity operates. Jungkook entered professional entertainment at 15 in a training system that is highly structured and leaves very little unscheduled time. The system is designed to produce specific skills for specific purposes: singing, dancing, stage presence, and the incentive structure rewards those skills above everything else. Pursuing something outside that framework, in that environment, requires active choice. You have to want it enough to use the limited available time for it rather than resting. The fact that Jungkook consistently made that choice across years of intense professional demand is not a small detail. His interest in learning has also extended into language. His English, which he has developed noticeably over the course of BTS's career, reflects genuine investment rather than the basic functional phrases many Korean artists acquire for international promotional purposes. During BTS's period of heightened global activities, their United Nations speeches, their U.S. talk show appearances, the 2021 and 2022 American Music Award performances, Jungkook's comfort in English settings increased visibly over time. He has discussed studying, mentioned specific moments of difficulty and progress, and demonstrated in live settings that his comprehension and expression have genuinely developed. Language acquisition is one of the most honest indicators of sustained curiosity because it cannot be faked in real-time conversation. The guitar is another thread. He began learning it with enough dedication that it became a recurring element of his personal content, acoustic covers shared with fans, informal performances during live streams, and eventually original material that incorporated his guitar playing as part of the musical composition rather than just as background. Still With You, the self-produced track he released as a free gift to ARMY on BTS's anniversary in 2020, included guitar elements that he contributed. And the song's emotional tone reflected a musical sensibility that had been developing quietly for years. There's also his engagement with music production itself. Jungkook has accumulated production credits across BTS's discography, not at the level of members like RM, Suga, or J-Hope, who are the group's primary producers, but enough to indicate someone who is actively learning how that side of music making works rather than leaving it entirely to others. His interest in understanding the full process, from writing and composition to production and mixing, is consistent with how he approaches other skills, He wants to understand the whole thing, not just the part that directly applies to his job description. The pattern across all of these examples is specific. He doesn't just dabble. He goes deep enough to become genuinely competent, and he doesn't stop when he reaches a level that would satisfy a casual hobbyist. That's a particular kind of learner, one who is motivated by understanding rather than by the social currency of being able to say they tried something. There's a psychological concept called intrinsic motivation, the drive to engage with something for the satisfaction of the activity itself, rather than for external reward. Research on skill development consistently identifies intrinsic motivation as the most reliable predictor of long-term growth, because it's the only type of motivation that survives the difficult middle stages of learning. When progress slows and the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels most discouraging. Jungkook's documented relationship with learning, the sustained engagement, the private investment, the demonstrable improvement over time, looks a great deal like what intrinsic motivation produces in practice. His BTS members have noted this quality from different angles. RM, in discussing the group's individual personalities, has described Jungkook as someone who gets genuinely absorbed in new interests, not fleetingly, but in a way that takes over his attention until he understands it well enough to satisfy himself. Suga has referenced Jungkook's musical curiosity specifically, noting that his questions about production during recording sessions reflect someone who actually wants to understand the craft rather than just execute his assigned part. For a person who has been famous since his mid-teens, who could reasonably have stopped growing after reaching a level that was already more than sufficient for his professional demands, the choice to keep learning, privately, consistently, across a decade plus of professional life, is one of the more revealing things about who Jungkook actually is beneath the metrics and the recognition. And that brings us to something even more foundational, because if curiosity is the engine that keeps him growing, what we're about to talk about next is the fuel. The kind of dedication that most people only manage for short periods, but that Jungkook has sustained across the full length of his career. Number 2. Jungkook is highly dedicated. Dedication is one of those words that gets applied so broadly it starts to lose meaning. In the entertainment industry specifically, it gets used as a default descriptor for almost anyone who works hard, which, in an industry as demanding as Korean pop, is essentially everyone who survives long enough to have a career. So when the word gets applied to Jungkook, it's worth being precise about what it actually means in his case, because the specifics tell a different story than the generic label. Start with a concrete moment that has been discussed extensively within BTS's documented history. During the recording of early BTS tracks, Jungkook would reportedly repeat vocal takes far beyond what was technically required, not because producers were asking for more, but because he wasn't satisfied with what he delivered. This wasn't occasional perfectionism in high-stakes moments. It was a consistent behavioral pattern that showed up early in his career, before he had any external validation to justify the standard he was holding himself to. He was a teenager, largely unknown, setting a bar for himself that most people wouldn't set until they had something significant to prove. Big Hit's training process, and later Hybes, is well documented through years of behind-the-scenes content. What that content reveals about Jungkook's relationship with rehearsal is consistent across time. He stays late. He runs things again. When the group has finished for the day and members are heading out, Jungkook has repeatedly been the one still in the practice room going over material. This has been mentioned not just in curated content, but in candid comments from the other members, the kind of observations that come out in interviews when no one is specifically trying to make a promotional point. Jimin, who trained alongside Jungkook from their early years and has spoken about him with unusual candor, has described watching Jungkook practice a single movement or a single vocal phrase repeatedly until it reached the quality he was looking for. Not the quality that the choreographer asked for. Not the quality that would pass review. The quality that satisfied Jungkook himself. That internal standard, calibrated personally, not externally, is the specific thing that separates dedication from mere compliance with a demanding system. There's a well-known account from BTS's early career period, when the group was not yet successful and the pressure on every performance was significant, of Jungkook pushing through physical discomfort during rehearsals rather than stepping back. This has been referenced in BTS's own documentary content, including the Bring the Soul and Break the Silence film projects, which followed the group during their international tours and captured unguarded moments that a scripted production would not have included. What those films show about Jungkook's relationship with performance and preparation is not the polished version. It's the version that includes exhaustion, physical strain, and the choice to continue anyway. His 2023 mandatory military enlistment, a requirement for all able-bodied South Korean men, was preceded by a period of intense solo activity that he described himself as wanting to complete fully, at the highest possible level. Before stepping away, the Golden Album, his solo debut, was not a project he approached minimally. He was involved in its creative development at a level that goes beyond what most artists participate in for a debut project, particularly one produced under the time constraints of a simultaneous group activity schedule. The album's sound, visual direction, and the physical preparation for its promotional performances all reflected someone who treated the project as something that needed to be done completely, not adequately. The live performance standard he holds himself to is worth examining specifically because it's the most publicly verifiable aspect of his dedication. Jungkook performs while singing live consistently across stadium concerts where the physical demands of the choreography alone would justify the use of a backing track. This is not standard industry practice. A significant number of performers at his level use extensive pre-recorded vocal support, particularly during complex dance sequences. His choice to prioritize live vocal quality, even at the cost of additional physical demand, is a deliberate one that reflects where he places his professional priorities. During BTS's stadium tours, the Love Yourself World Tour in 2018 and 2019, the Map of the Soul Plan Tour, the Permission to Dance on Stage concerts in 2021 and 2022. The consistency of his vocal output across multiple consecutive nights in large venues was something that professionals in the industry noted. Stadium acoustics are unforgiving. The combination of high-intensity choreography and live singing in that environment requires a standard of preparation that cannot be improvised. It has to be built over time, through the kind of repetitive practice that most people find too tedious to sustain. There's also a mental component to dedication that often goes undiscussed, the ability to maintain standards when motivation fluctuates. Motivation is not constant, in any field, for any person. The days when preparation feels exciting and energizing are easier. The days when it feels like obligation, when the body is tired and the mind is somewhere else, are the ones that actually determine whether someone is genuinely dedicated or just enthusiastic in good conditions. Jungkook's consistency across a career that now spans over a decade, through periods of intense public pressure, through personal challenges that he has acknowledged in interviews, through the physical and psychological demands of sustained global-level performance, suggests someone whose dedication operates even when the favorable conditions aren't present. His own comments about this quality are revealing in their simplicity. He has described, across various interviews and personal content, a straightforward internal logic. If he's going to do something, he wants to do it right. Not perfectly, he has also been open about imperfection and the difficulty of his own standards, but fully. That's not a complicated philosophy. But the number of people who hold that standard and actually sustain it across long periods is considerably smaller than the number who articulate it. Which makes the final fact on this list the one that ties everything together, because all of the dedication, the curiosity, the competitive drive, and the discipline ultimately flows toward one place. And understanding that changes how you read everything else about him. Number 1. Jungkook always wants to give his best for ARMY. Everything discussed so far, the range of skills, the artistic curiosity, the physical discipline, the competitive drive, the relentless appetite for improvement, the dedication that operates even on the days when motivation isn't cooperating. All of it connects to something Jungkook has stated directly and demonstrated consistently across his entire career. He does it for the people watching. That sounds like a standard artist talking point. It isn't in his case. And the difference between a talking point and a genuine orientation becomes visible when you look at the specific ways it has shown up in his behavior over more than a decade. Start with Still With You. In June 2020, on the 7th anniversary of BTS's debut, Jungkook released a self-produced song, not through official label channels as a commercial single, but directly and for free as a gift to ARMY. He wrote it, produced it, and released it with no commercial framework attached. The song, which deals with themes of distance, longing, and connection, resonated immediately and deeply with fans. It reached streaming numbers that would have been significant for a properly marketed release, purely through organic listening driven by the emotional response it generated. The choice to give it away rather than monetize it was deliberate, and it was consistent with a pattern of behavior that had been visible for years. Jungkook treats his relationship with fans as something that exists outside the transactional structure of the music industry. The Golden Closet film series, short films he filmed and edited himself during tour periods, is another specific example. During the Love Yourself World Tour in 2018 and 2019, when BTS was performing in cities across North America, Europe, and Asia, Jungkook used his personal time between and after shows to film and edit short documentary-style pieces capturing moments from the tour. He then released these to fans. He did not have to do this. It was not part of any promotional obligation. He did it because he wanted fans to see what the experience looked like from inside, and because he understood that the people who couldn't be in those venues were still emotionally invested in what was happening. The detail that matters here is the effort involved. Video editing is time-consuming, genuinely time-consuming, not in the casual sense. Doing it well, during a stadium world tour when physical recovery between shows is already limited, required him to prioritize it against competing demands on his limited personal time. He made that choice repeatedly, across multiple cities, across multiple months. That's not a gesture. That's a sustained commitment. His behavior at fan meetings and personal engagement events has been documented across years and across different formats: the pre-recorded content, the live Wever streams, the in-person events when the group's schedule allowed them. What comes through consistently is an attentiveness that goes beyond professional courtesy. He remembers things. He references specific moments from previous interactions. He responds to the emotional tone of what fans are expressing rather than delivering a scripted response to the category of the question. People who have interacted with him in those contexts, and there are enough first-hand accounts across years to constitute a meaningful pattern, describe a quality of presence that feels genuine rather than performed. This matters more than it might initially seem, because the psychological demands of that kind of engagement are real and significant. Jungkook has been famous since he was 15. The relationship between idol and fan in Korean pop culture is intense and structurally asymmetric in ways that can become exhausting for the person on the receiving end of that volume of attention and emotion. The fact that he has maintained genuine warmth and attentiveness across that extended period, rather than retreating into protective distance, reflects something real about how he relates to the people who follow his work. There's a moment from BTS's 2021 permission to dance on stage concerts, the group's return to live performance after a period of pandemic-related restrictions that had prevented in-person shows for nearly 2 years. That has been discussed extensively. Jungkook's emotional response during those shows was visible and unguarded. He has spoken about what the absence of live audiences meant to him during the restriction period, and about what it felt like to be back in front of people who had waited for that return. The vulnerability in those descriptions was not calculated. It was the language of someone for whom the connection with audiences is not incidental to the work, but central to why the work matters at all. His military enlistment in December 2023 was preceded by a message to fans that was, by his own typical standards, unusually direct about how much the relationship with ARMY had shaped his career and his sense of purpose. He acknowledged the sacrifice, his own and theirs, in terms of the time apart, without sentimentalizing it. He expressed gratitude without the hollow formality that often makes artist statements feel empty. He asked fans to take care of themselves while he was away. It was, in its plainness, more moving than most carefully written farewell statements. What Jungkook has built with ARMY over the course of his career is not something that can be manufactured through good PR or a consistent content strategy, though both of those things exist around him. It's built through repeated small choices, to give something rather than hold it back, to show up fully rather than protect himself through distance, to treat the people on the other side of the stage as real rather than as a category. Those choices compound over time into something that feels qualitatively different from what most public figures manage to create. The reason this sits at number 1 on this list is not because it's the most dramatic fact about Jungkook, or the most statistically impressive, or the most immediately visible in a highlight reel. It's here because it's the fact that contextualizes every other one. The dedication is meaningful because it's aimed at something beyond personal achievement. The curiosity matters because it produces better work for people he genuinely cares about impressing. The discipline sustains itself, in part, because the reason behind it is real. Understanding that doesn't make the other facts smaller. It makes them make more sense. So there it is, 7 facts about Jungkook that, taken together, paint a picture that goes well beyond what a highlight reel or a chart position can capture. What's worth sitting with is how coherent the picture actually is. The golden magne who picks up skills faster than almost anyone around him. The artist who draws quietly in sketchbooks when no one's asking him to. The person who treats physical training not as an obligation, but as something he genuinely needs. The competitor who turns even a casual game into something he wants to win. The learner who doesn't stop at good enough in anything he touches. The performer who runs vocal takes again and again until they reach a standard he set for himself. And at the center of all of it, someone who has consistently directed that entire output toward the people watching. None of these facts exist in isolation. They describe the same person, operating from the same core of who he is, across very different contexts. That consistency is probably the most telling thing of all. Which of these facts landed differently than you expected? Let us know in the comments, and if there's another BTS member you want covered with the same depth, that conversation starts with you hitting that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one.